Okay. Hi, everyone. Hi, mostly to the
Hey,
recording people that are going to be watching this. Um, yeah, we're doing books 5 and 6 of Saint Augustine's Confessions. Past book clubs, we've talked a lot about his upbringing, him going from like a child to an adolescent to a young adult, him leaving the house, separating from faith or like leaving, departing from faith, getting further and further away from God and engaging a lot with this sect called the Manicheans, who had a lot of far out beliefs that there was a cosmic battle between good and evil, beliefs that the body was evil, beliefs that what else? I don't know. They had lots of crazy beliefs. But basically, in book 5, he starts to question these guys a lot more, or at least like put their ideas to a lot more scrutiny. His career, Augustine's career at this point is starting to take off a little bit. He's teaching, he's moving around to different cities, and he's gaining a good reputation, more or less, career wise. But he's still kind of engaged with these Manicheans, and Faustus, one of the prophets, or like one of the leaders of this Manichean sect, he tries to engage with Augustine and give him a lot of the answers that he's seeking. Augustine presses these people a lot to give them like good answers for like the problem of evil or the nature of God or all these types of like questions that any type of doubting theist might have. And he's not very satisfied with the answers that they're giving him. They just seem to be like sophists at the end of the day. Um, People who can speak really well, who are great orators, but there's no meat or there's no substance to the answers that they're giving. So that's kind of where book 5 starts off. Him doubting or questioning all of these theories and mathematical proofs that the Manichaeans claim to have. And I think one of the most important things to note in this book is that no matter how much he knows, how many facts he's learning, or how many like uh, proofs that these Manichaeans can come up with, he's still not happy. So there's an aspect to knowing stuff um, that's leaving him, or there's this aspect to knowledge that's leaving him unfulfilled. He was learning things, but these things weren't making him happy. He was receiving a lot of like quantitative information, a lot of facts about the world, and a lot of facts about things, but it was still leaving him empty at the end of the day. And he kind of comes to realize that the value of certain things isn't in their measurements or in their descriptions. It's kind of like how you can understand the precise height of a house, how much it weighs, how many rooms it has, but not understand the value that it might be a home for a family. So there's like this distinction between like knowing pure facts and pure like numerical things, and then appreciating its value for like this aesthetic quality or like this subjective experience that it might give you of joy. And then that's where he kind of takes off in book 5. I think this is it feels at least when I'm reading it like this is when he starts to get a little bit closer to God, closer to faith, closer to understanding that knowledge is a lot more than 3 plus 3 equals 6. There's like a wisdom aspect or like an aesthetic aspect to knowing things. Then in book 6, he talks a little bit about epistemology, about skepticism, um, Pyrrhonian skepticism versus academic skepticism, which we can like talk about. There's a bit of a difference between those two things, and he starts to consider that, damn, like maybe we have a lot of facts that we know, a lot of stuff that we know about the world, but we are kind of taking it on faith, but passing it off as a fact. Something like knowing who your parents are. Like we were told that this is my mom, this is my dad, but you couldn't see yourself being born. Like you don't have like empirical verifiable proof, other than maybe like a birth certificate. But you're just like kind of accepting the fact that maybe you're just taking some things on faith, and that's okay. That's part of like human knowledge. That's how we learn. You've never seen the Earth from outer space as a sphere, but you still know it to be a round orb. And these are the kind of like truths or like facts that he's hinting at. He's like, okay, well, maybe there's a little more to knowledge. There's like a sociological aspect or a belief aspect to knowledge. Um, and that's what I took. That's what I took from these two books, mostly. But yeah, I'll leave it off there. What did you guys think?
Go ahead, Cade.
I don't know. I always have had interest in like the Manicheans and like what they're, especially like religions that have, Manichaeism isn't really around. At least I don't think anymore.
Yeah, disappeared.
No, so but I remember in book one, doesn't he also talk about not remembering what happened before he was born and as a baby, and then all of a sudden he was just thrown into existence, kind of? I think it was in book one, towards the end.
Yeah, he's like, I don't remember before being born, or I don't remember being born, but I still should be. And he's questioning whether or not he should be held accountable for his nature at that point. I think, if I'm remembering properly, like original
Yeah,
sin was
I
a
mean,
big
it's
topic. Yeah.
it's a lot of like belief in things that you can't experience as well. Like, how much can we trust? I feel like is maybe a good question to ask. The things that we haven't experienced yet.
Hmm. Yeah, the big.
Um,
Oh, sorry. Go for it.
I just thought that, because we were talking about, I don't know if you were there, Chris. We were talking about love the other day, and on my copy at least, it's page 106, but I think it's from section 20 to 22 of book 6. He's been talking about marriage and how he thought that originally he would be very miserable if he was deprived by embraces of a woman. Um, and then the very next section, he was talking about how Alypius was discouraging him from marriage because then he couldn't pursue philosophy basically and theology. Um, and to me, that kind of just seems like quite the influence on many 19th century philosophers like Schopenhauer, Kierkegaard. They just like push away women in pursuit of doing what they want to do the most. And I wonder if that's where they got it from, because I think that considering he is this sort of Neoplatonist, I kind of like to call him um, the Christian Neoplatonist. It seems like love isn't kind of respected in the same sense that Plato would respect love. So I wonder if maybe the Platonist that he was reading, Plotinus, was kind of twisting what Plato thought about love.
Well, I don't think it's love exactly that he's departing from, or like not being made as important as it should be. It's just that the object of love has become God, and not a marriage or a woman.
Right. And in the Bible, it talks about how we're supposed to be brides to Christ. That's kind of like a big thing. And another thing I think about is in Corinthians, I believe it was, where Paul talks about how if you're called to just like love God, you should do certain things like celibacy or whatever. But if your passion's too bright, he's like, I'd rather you get married than burn with passion. I think is like kind of what the lines were. So there's this idea that like instead of focusing on the worldly, you focus on God. It's basically like a monk lifestyle that he's almost promoting early on.
Yeah, it's an aesthetic or ascetic lifestyle, a very
Yeah,
monastic lifestyle.
which is partly like why priests in at least Catholicism aren't allowed to get married unless under I think certain very specific circumstances.
Yeah, I guess it's hard for me to take this contextually when I've never read the Bible or anything like that. So,
Bible book
Yeah, I
club
mean a
next.
lot of Augustine, if you have noticed, if you look at like the verses he references, it's almost all Paul's letters. It's like Corinthians, Romans,
there's also is P.S. Paul's or is that Psalms?
Psalms.
Yeah.
Psalms are from that's the Old Testament, but he references those a lot as well.
It is important.
Psalms is a book of songs.
Yeah. I don't know if have we talked about his like like the one turning point, or is that maybe in the next chapter? But it's the reason like Paul is so important to him is because when he's having that was like his conversion, when he's like absolutely freaking out, panicking. I don't know if this is Monica or him crying, but he's like crying outside and like ripping his hair out and he doesn't know what to do and he's freaking out. And then he hears a voice from like a boy saying, "Read, pick up and read." And then he just like flips to the closest like Bible he has, opens it up, and it's Paul's. So like that was like that's like his go-to. It's like his
I do think that's next because I saw like the chapters
yeah, that might be
be
next.
something about Paul's in book 7 near like the Neoplatonist approaches.
Yeah, that would be why he's so obsessed with Paul's. Would be my guess at least.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff he's relaying, you can basically just find in Paul's letters.
Hmm.
Like he's kind of showing his own engagement with that. At least I feel, but again, I've read the Bible, so I don't know if either of you have.
I've read
Like
most
Ori
of
said,
it.
it's like it's kind of hard to know like what the references are and stuff.
Yeah, I'm not as well versed, I can guarantee.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of I think a lot of therapeutic value that people get out of this is they stop focusing on the worldly, right? That's kind of like the biggest point of I feel of Paul's letters is changing your he's rebuking churches basically and he's trying to reorient them towards God above all else. I mean, even in marriage as a Christian, you're supposed to put God above the marriage,
Hmm.
right? It's just focusing on the ultimate good, the ultimate divine source of everything above all else
Yeah,
and contemplating it.
an absolute
Because that's what like
non-negotiable.
monks do. They just contemplate like the ultimate good, which is God and Christianity, like all day. That's their job.
Not a bad life, honestly.
Yeah, just chilling, and you get everything paid for too. You don't have to worry about.
Free housing, free food.
Yeah, for
Who's paying
real.
for that?
You
Is
just
that
need to
taxpayer
sell your
money?
soul to God.
I think it's the church tithing money, probably.
So,
Well, again, I go to Protestant churches, so I don't witness that, but I know about it. That's another thing too. Like different denominations are going to read this book differently.
yeah, or like highlight
You
different
know,
parts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do you know if he was like Catholic or what he was?
he's mostly important to the Catholics.
Mhm.
You're not going to find as much of his influence in Orthodoxy or Protestantism, like when it comes to like the way people interpret Scripture.
Yeah,
I
very, very
see.
Catholic, but his influence was like just global, like in everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, for sure. I mean, his like he's the one who described the Trinity, I believe, like the first one to put words to it, really, like formalize it.
Hmm.
So that doctrine's important throughout any Christian sect. I guess except maybe Mormonism, but and also the Orthodox have a different view of the Trinity as well. With the way I forgot, it's like the Holy Spirit proceeds from only the Father, I think, in Orthodoxy, while in every other sect, it's the Holy Spirit proceeds from both the Son and the Father. But that's like I don't even know if that would mean anything to either of you guys, but
I've struggled to understand the Trinity, the multiplicity and a unity at the same time.
I don't know, read Parmenides or something.
Yeah.
No,
Oh, okay.
I'm joking. But yeah, well, the other part was again a point that gets brought up over and over and over, which is this knowing beyond pure like propositional, logical, syllogistic arguments,
Mhm. Yeah, I wanna
which is
talk about how we can come to know things. Um,
yeah. Well, I was wondering too, like a lot of philosophers they deal with the non-propositional in like many different ways, but I have issue with a lot of the ways that they deal with it as well. Sometimes they'll completely abandon like logic altogether and just embrace absurdity. So I'm kind of wondering like how philosophers can talk about these types of knowing that are beyond, I don't know, like syllogisms
Yeah.
Right.
perhaps. Like how do we talk about it without being intellectually disingenuous?
That's a good question.
How do you
Because I think
define
it's
knowledge?
important, you
How
know.
do you define knowledge, Ori? How would you say you come to know things? Or is there like a linguistic issue when we're saying we know things?
Um, I think that I actually had this conversation the other day. I think because of the Gettier problem, I have to get around JTB in a sort of way. And so, because you'll take like something like an AI, right? And it to me seems like they have the ability to create a justified,
True belief?
not true belief, but a proposition that is true that's also justified.
Okay.
Um, and because I don't think they're the kinds of things that can believe something, right? But so it seems like they have knowledge. Um, and to me, I don't think that they do because they're just taken from a massive database. It's not fair to say that something like that has knowledge. It doesn't seem like the kind of thing that has knowledge. So I over here think that maybe it's this kind of you on top of this justification, this account for a proposition that is true. You might need this sort of semantic understanding um, of what makes this thing true. That's harder to put into words than just justification. Um, or like this kind of account of why it's true. Um, but you need to have this like deeper conceptual meaning or understanding of the thing that you are talking about, right? Um,
Like
and that's
when I ask you something like the capital of Canada is Ottawa. How do you know that? How do you like justify that belief in your mind, AI aside?
um, I mean,
Would you say you know that?
I that's a good question. I would probably, I mean, for ease of use, yeah, I would say that I know it because it's on every single map that I've ever looked at. And it seems to me that it's kind of hard to put that 100% to that 99%, right? This can we know it for certain? Um, and I've always been kind of iffy on whether or not we can know inductive things for absolute certain. That doesn't mean that you know what I mean. You're not looking for 100% when you go for inductive arguments because that's just not what induction is. Induction can't give you that 100%. That's not how induction works. You can't ask for induction to do what only deduction can do. Um, so,
That
I mean,
makes
I'm quite certain
yeah.
that it is, and if it's not, then it's I'd like to blame all the maps that I've ever looked at and all the geography teachers I've ever had, but
And I think
I've never fully confirmed it.
I think in that way you're exactly in the shoes that Augustine's in, because he also wants that type of like 100% certainty about all the questions he's having, but he still has that little bit of like a skeptical doubt. He's like, maybe I was lied to. Maybe there's some things that I just didn't get right. Maybe I was seeing something like a little bit foggy when he comes to knowing stuff or saying that he knows stuff. It just seems a little bit odd or off-putting to say that I don't know that this microphone in front of me is black, or that I don't know that my name is Chris. Maybe
Well,
it's a
something like
linguistic thing too. Maybe when I'm saying I know something, I'm just saying I am very, very certain, or like I have a high degree of certainty that this is probably the case. Yeah.
yeah, and that sounds a lot like Bayesianism, right? Where you just keep updating your probabilities unconsciously, right? You know something even more and more. every time you get some new piece of information, or you know it less and less, even if you get a piece of information that contradicts that, right? Like, I have my phone here in front of me, and I'm not gonna pull this Humean outlook where if I look away from my phone, I'm no longer certain it's there, right? That gets into these ideas of object permanence and whatnot. But I think that I could be quite certain that my phone is there, considering I can see every, like, I'm looking at the entrance to my room and nobody's coming in, right? Like, um, so I do think there are some things that we can know for certain, but it's really annoying to define knowledge. That doesn't mean we can't know things though, just because we can't find a definition for it, right?
And that's where Augustine departs from, or doesn't depart from, but he starts to say, okay, well, there's that type of like propositional logic or like factual knowledge that you can just like accept and take at face value, but then there's the wisdom aspect. There's at some point you just need to like take for granted or basically believe in the facts that you were taught. And I like that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my concern with philosophy was going like, how do I handle the non-propositionals? Like, how do I handle like actual wisdom? Because I don't equate knowledge with wisdom. You know, how does this? Because it's hard to account for it philosophically without just using, I don't know, like poetic language or like I can't put it into a truth table, right? And this is actually most things in life, right? In reality, when I leave my head, there isn't any propositions that can tell me how to live my life. So like how do I handle and how do I write real philosophy too on top of that while still I don't know, it's just a weird question for me because I focus a lot on the non-propositional. That's where I find most interest in philosophy is in things that are non-propositional throughout most of my study. People who have answers to this kind of stuff. But it feels I have a contention where people will say, for example, they'll take a stance of like relativism or something. And they'll say everything is subjective. And I feel like a lot of these stances cut out any chance for actual intellectual investigation. They feel almost anti intellectual. Like, why would I pursue this if it's just in my head? So I don't know if that little tangent kind of puts any ideas in your guys' head, but
I
I
mean,
just
I
kind of want
agree.
to figure out how to do the non-propositional with integrity.
I think I completely agree with that. When you kind of go to this relativistic standpoint, or um, this sort of subjectivism, right? It seems like, okay, so why are we even doing this? It's like kind of avoidant almost of finding answers, and
Yes.
that's kind of anti-philosophy. I feel like, to
Right. So
me
at
at
what
least.
point are we being disingenuous philosophically too is kind of like because like if I go one way full analytic, obviously I'm not going to figure out all the questions of wisdom that I want. But if I go in the complete opposite direction, I feel like I lose philosophical integrity. So there's this like
And
balancing
I think
act.
that's like a almost like a dogmatic view that the West has adopted when it comes to philosophy. It's like it starts to get less and less credible the less and less analytical it is. Um, which I
What do you
don't
mean the
know if I
West? Because I feel like, when you say the West, are you talking about like Europe too?
like analytic Europeans, like when someone says, "Oh, I do philosophy," like you don't want it to be like a fluffy or non-propositional type of philosophy. You want it to be like, or some people would want it to be like, oh, like a truth table, your proper logic, your, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I
I've
find philosophy needs to be able to cover all those dimensions, like the analytic and beyond that. But
I'd agree with Cade there. Um, but the problem. that I run into, I feel like, is that it seems as if both sects of philosophy sometimes overly ignore the other. By both sects, I mean analytic and continental. But I think it's important to inform the other, and not just completely ignore it, right? Because I think we do have some useful things from propositional logic, but we also have some useful things when it comes to talking about things beyond that, like how history and values play a role in everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of also hard to like engage in certain things, I think, like ethics using analytic philosophy. Maybe I'm wrong there, but there's like certain domains of philosophy too that are more well equipped to handle certain areas. I mean, my goal has always been to be as holistically a philosopher as I can, which means covering both the analytic and the continental and trying to figure out what tools are best to use in every domain.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and when it comes to questions like how to live a good life, morality, all that type of stuff, analytic philosophy falls a little bit short for me, and that's why I like Augustine so much in this sense, because he accepts that that's just like a slice of what wisdom is. It's just like one piece of the pie. There's a like bigger way of knowing stuff and coming to truths. Like this like
Yeah,
subjective pleasure that you get, or like this thing beyond quantity, like what I was saying with like the house. Like you can't understand the value of a home in terms of the square footage. It's like a very subjective and aesthetic thing. It's like to know like what that might mean for a family, or like what a home actually is.
yeah. I mean, a lot of the Christian worldview is dealing with, I would say, the non-propositional world. There's maybe a few, not really. I mean, even like the books that are more philosophical within the Bible have a, they're not like rigorous. They're like Ecclesiastes is exploring a nihilistic man, right? It's almost like taking an approach of like, if I were to take on this perspective, what would my life look like? And that's kind of like what Kierkegaard does too. That's kind of like his whole work is taking on different perspectives and letting you see the outcomes of it.
Did you guys have any passages that spoke to you? Ori, I'm interested for you especially. If any passages like particular ones like spoke to you from like tickled your mind in the non-analytic way.
I mean, I I don't know. For me, I just didn't feel like I was telling Kay this, and before you started the recording, right? It just seems to me like I felt almost impious reading this, considering I'm not religious at all, and reading this seems like I needed to have a religious outlook on life to really kind of get much from it. It just read like a autobiography almost, right?
That's really interesting because
Yeah.
I'm on the same boat as you, right? I did not grow up religious at all. I've never had any strong beliefs, and maybe it's because of like I had a prof like present this book in a really like palatable way. Um and he like established that Augustine is not anti-science, he's not anti-logic, he's not like anything like that, and
Right, right.
we
No,
shouldn't take
I agree.
yeah, this to be like that, and that there's a lot of things that just like at face value for anyone regardless of like your religious belief or inclination, it could speak to you.
Well, yeah,
Like
obviously it's
this
going to
one I
speak to
had.
me a lot more than you guys, right?
Like this one I had on my what is this section 6 of chapter 6. He says, "I wanted to be as certain about things I could not see as much as I am certain that 7 and 3 are 10. I was not so mad as to think that I could consider even that to be something unknowable." And it's like, yeah, I want to be as certain as I can about a lot of things, but you can't. I can't get there always. Like religion aside, I guess.
Well, yeah, even it goes back to when he said, before you were born, or even when you were a little kid, right? You didn't remember being a baby.
You don't remember
At
being
least
a
I don't
baby?
think any of you do.
Oh, you
Right?
don't remember?
Nope.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not ever gonna deny that there's gonna be takeaways from a reading like this, right? But I remember when I was in my medieval class, I much more enjoyed one of his works called um something like on the choice and free will, and that to me felt like it was at least attempting to answer more than just like it gave me more than a autobiography, so to speak. I
I
think
was
that's why
saying
I enjoyed
too,
it.
like if we ever do like more religious thinkers in the future, maybe picking one of their more philosophical works would be a better idea as well. Like maybe one of a different Augustine book, right?
Yeah.
Something that's a little bit more rigorous. Although this is like an introduction to him, so maybe this will inspire people to read one of his more, philosophical works.
Yeah, this is like it's a gateway to Augustine or to Christian thought, I think, which is nice.
Yeah. I mean, I also just, I do feel bad for people who like aren't religious and are reading this a little bit cuz like I don't like to subject people to so much God talk without adding more philosophical undertones. So, you know, I mean, it's a good
Yeah,
book. I still think it's worth reading. I don't think it was the worst choice. I personally like it, and I do think there is a lot of philosophy. You kind of have to look for it a bit more than you would, like if you're just reading like Spinoza or something. Obviously, he's doing philosophy.
Yeah, you do
Kind of have
need
to read between the lines a little bit.
you do need to either like to dig a little bit or to do secondary readings if you want to like engage with it like really philosophically. Like he talks about tons of philosophical stuff on the surface, like a skepticism and all that stuff. But if you want to get into nitty gritty, like distinctions between the academic skepticism and Pyrrhonian skepticism, like you're not gonna find it here laid out for you nicely.
Right. I mean, this is the book for me personally that like I'll find passages that hit me and I almost like meditate on them, not to like pick them apart, but just to let those words sit with me. It almost feels like more of that kind of book too, like let these certain words sit with you. A lot of prayer is supposed to be that, where you're supposed to sit with these ideas and hopefully come to some real change in life, right? Or maybe a different perspective.
Yeah, it's a very very contemplative book. Um, which is nice because like the rest of my time I spend reading is just like papers and like dense arguments and stuff. So
Right?
yeah.
it's a great break um to like yeah.
Yeah, I've been going through Husserl's ideas again, so I get what you mean because I was just reading that before coming here. It's a completely different experience. A lot more relaxing for me, at least. Even though his language is somewhat difficult, I think, more than most
Mhm.
religious. Well, no, a lot of religious like philosophers are pretty rigorous, but as a religious text, it's a bit more dense. Like I don't know if I could suggest this to my parents to read. You know, I don't know if they would really get much out of it either, despite them being Christians.
But yeah, the like aside from Augustine being or ending up very very Christian, I just like I feel like I there's like a subjective aspect, like I see myself a little bit in Augustine. Like he's also a teacher, he's also trying to figure his life out, he's also a young guy. He's also
I
questioning
mean,
everything all the
the
time.
tearing his hair out and freaking out is like To me, Augustine, when I read him, he's a lot more like you get to feel his personality and his humanness a lot more than philosophers of that time.
Hmm. Yeah, it's
A
like
lot
I'm
of
reading a
him
human.
shines through.
Yeah.
Right, because he's unapologetically basically confessing. It's Confessions, right? That's the name of the book. He's laying himself out there for the world to see and to maybe learn from. Like I said, the part where he talks about how he was in love with loving, that part really hit me pretty hard compared to a lot of other things said in the book too. I mean, there's a few times I almost felt like I was being rebuked, but I think there was towards the end of book 2 where he talked about a lot of sin is just people trying to imitate God. Talks about how like greed was people wanting as much as God had, and envy was like, like all these things, all these sins were people trying to imitate God but without God. That sort of, I mean, that's an interesting idea. I don't know if that is kind of offensive towards people who aren't Christians, but
I mean, I don't remember if it was Augustine, but there's this idea in Christian medieval thought that like many people who came before um, Christianity were Christians. They just didn't know it, and maybe that does seem like putting your view on others, right?
yeah, I mean, a lot of Christianity, at least if you're not super strict about everything, a lot of it is like, did you live a good life? Not even just are you a Christian? It's like, did you live like Christ? Did you? So a
Would you
lot of
say
people will,
living like Christ though is like living the good life, right?
yeah. So if people like pursued things with a pure heart and they, were non-judgmental towards other people and they did all these different things that the Bible commands, you might say that they had like a Christian heart in some ways. Um, I don't really do that analysis myself. I tend to just, I mean, I have like very specific beliefs. Like I believe that post-mortem people can still like turn to God when he presents himself. Like I don't believe like all atheists just go to hell or something, and I don't even believe hell is what people say it is.
What is
But
it?
well, it's not clearly defined, which is the issue. Like heaven is not really clearly defined either. Like the Book of Revelation says heaven is also going to collide with earth, whatever that means. Like earth and heaven are both going to go at each other and become like one thing. I mean, there was I think there was a reference that Jesus was talking about with hell where he describes it. He gives a description of a place that was like in Israel at the time, I think. But it was some valley where people would sacrifice children. And basically what he was trying to say is like you will be in hell, you'll succumb to such low instincts that you'll find that type of stuff justifiable, which is interesting. Like I imagine it more that people surrendering to their lowest instincts than like, and I also do not believe that it's inescapable. It doesn't fully imply or not imply that in the Bible either. I don't really want to get too far into it because I don't want to preach to you guys, but
No, no, no. I like hearing it. I like hearing this. Yeah.
it's, I mean, I can also like send different things because there's so many views on it because it's ambiguous. So when people say like, like this person was probably a Christian without knowing it, I wouldn't say that. I would say that their heart's intentions were good and they lived a good life. Because I mean, that's kind of the goal, is just to live a good life, to live virtuously. I mean, I think Plato had the same goal, right? Live virtuously, or maybe more Aristotle. I think defined that more clearly.
No, yeah.
But I think
I
that's
would
kind of what
agree. I
they
would agree in
mean.
saying if there, yeah, if there is a hell, it wouldn't make sense for me to it be unescapable or inescapable.
Will be pretty freaking hard though if you think
It
about it.
would
If you're
be.
surrendering to
I
your
mean, if you
lowest
got there.
instincts, I think it would be pretty difficult. So that's where
But not
a
impossible.
lot of the stuff was just to scare people too. Like if you look at the history of the church, a lot of people are just trying to scare people so that they would, maybe one thing was, pay the Catholic Church. Like, hey, I'm scared. I'm gonna do this. Oh, well, if you just give me $5, your time in purgatory will be less or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of these doctrines have been abused to hurt other people. Same with like the Spanish Inquisition and just many different times in history. So it's really hard to define these things without all the baggage that comes with them. But I think that's what they mean. I mean, I don't know if that's offensive. Like, I don't try to project my worldview onto someone, but if I tell you that, like, you have a heart like Christ, I just mean that, like, you're a really good person. You know? Like, I don't think they mean it as, like, oh, they would have been Christian if. I don't know if anyone would have been Christian if they were born after it. But did they live a good life? Did they really. Were they virtuous people? Did they help those in need? Did they do all these things? Well, then maybe I would say something like that. But again, I don't know if is that offensive to say about someone?
Not to me. Not to me, at least.
Like you have a heart like Christ?
Yeah, because I think you need to be quite stereotypical, or like maybe, I don't know, prejudicial to assume that when someone says that, it's like in a like an imposing way.
Well, I think people worry about like, oh, are you just trying to evangelize them or is this a real
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
compliment?
A lot of people would probably get that feeling, but I don't know, someone who's read more than a book might
I
I don't
will
think
say
they
a
would
lot
get
of
that.
Christians don't realize how they come off.
Hmm.
Like they a lot of what they say they mean it in a different way than how it's usually interpreted because we're just so used to, at least the Christian communities I grew up are just so used to like the way that people speak to each other that they don't find it offensive. And then they go out in the world and someone will say like, "Oh, I'll pray for you," and then they take offense to that. Like, "Oh, does that mean you think I'm doing something wrong?" It's like I also pray for my family. I would pray for anyone if they're in trouble. Like it doesn't. There's no distinguishing like, oh, you're not Christian, so I'm going to pray extra hard for you. It's like even Christians need a lot of prayer. But I don't
Yeah,
know.
so
There is some
in
Christians that are
most of
offensive.
the Abrahamic, religions. Sorry to interrupt you all.
No, go
I was
ahead.
just listening. So yeah, it's an interesting take. In most of the Abrahamic religions, not only just Christians, they have this concept of a reward, like heaven and hell. I'm a Muslim, so I am aware of it. So I guess at the end of the day, what really matters is what what are you doing with your life, or what's the count of your deeds. Basically, that is the thing which at the end of the day meets, right, your deeds, what you did on this world, or the life that you have been given. They judge by that. And the thing that which you all mentioned a few minutes ago about the concept of heaven and hell, that something that I have learned is that, which I know probably, is that all of the people in most of the Abrahamic religions, they believe that all people who will be descended into hell will be sent back to heaven, right, after they have uh, you know, suffered their days. And then yeah, so that's something
Well,
very
the Catholics
interesting to
have
me.
purgatory, which is kind of like a similar to that. Like people wait in purgatory to be cleansed of their sins, and then they go to heaven.
Yeah,
I
so
don't
it's a
believe in
similar
purgatory,
concept.
but yeah, it's a similar thing to that. I mean, from what my reading is that God, when you go to Him, you will be judged, and you will have to basically live the pain of all the horrible things that you did. and it has to be burned
Exactly,
off from
exactly.
you. Like you're
Exactly. That's
they call it like being
that's
set on fire almost, right? That's almost like where the fire comes from, because it's like you're being burned away of all this thing, and it's not a fun process. Hell to me would be you refuse the burning process, so you just in some way you continue to burn in your own egoism in a way. I mean, it's metaphorical language, I believe. In a sense, like you're just forever pinned to yourself in this way when you're in hell. Like you don't accept that you did these things wrong. You're very prideful. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, and also one more interesting. That's the thing, right? I can sit. The concept of hell sits with me, right? You will be cursed with the bad deeds which you have done. Okay, that's okay, and then you will be burned. The concept of that clearly sits right with me. Okay, but the concept of heaven, I am not that religious, but the concept of heaven, like eternal happiness. Concept of heaven is eternal happiness. Like you live uh, till infinitely, till eternity, happiness. Like fucking happy. Like, how could that be possible? I mean, that has to, that can't be possible. And even if I do believe it, there's something that just bugs me, and this that says that there has to be a catch. Either we will be sent back or some shit like that, or I don't know. Fuck that.
I mean, what I want to say too, at least like for my beliefs, I'm just trying to get what I can out of it, but at the end of the day, I don't think I really actually know what happens. This is just kind of like me trying to put together the pieces of what I've read. And like my brother, he's Christian too. He asked me though, he's like, "Do you think heaven would be just where, you're purely happy, meaning like all your ailments are taken away, or to be something more like pure experience, like pure peak experience for eternity?" Something like that. I mean, it's hard too because it's like, well, if everyone's just happy and everything's sound, then does anything ever happen?
Have you
Is it just
have you
That's
watched
exactly that's it. That's exactly my
have you guys watched The Good Place? It's
Oh gosh.
it's like a TV show that talks about, yeah, like what happens after you die and like where you're placed, and then it's really funny their depictions of like what heaven might be, where everyone's up there completely happy doing all the things they love, but then they become these like these philosophical zombies where they just like become tired of always being so happy all the time. There's nothing but happiness, and then at the very end of the show, spoiler alert, they become they're like released almost, like a type of like peak
yeah,
happy suicide.
that's a common trope too.
Yeah.
This is a common trope too. I don't know if you've ever like I've watched the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion. The whole point of the show is like everyone melts together and becomes one. And then they realize that if there is no distance between people, if everyone is just part of one thing, then there is no like intimacy. There's no like intimacy actually requires distance. It doesn't if you're just melted together, like it's a soup of nothing, you know? So I don't see heaven being that way. When they say heaven comes down to earth, I would rather think it's an elevated level of experience rather than because it still sounds like, especially when you read it, that people are still allowed to make free choices and decisions. It just sounds like a higher state of living in some ways, but I'm
so
not sure.
yeah. Basically, every religion has different concept of heaven, right? So according to some Abrahamic religions, like yeah, I'm also a Muslim, so I partly believe that, but they basically say that the consciousness which you have right now, right, the consciousness from which I'm talking to you right now, we are having this discussion, won't be there in heaven. Like in heaven, you will be free from I don't know. It will be different realm of thought. You'll be free from desires. But again, if you will be free from desires, then heaven consists everything. Then what's the use of it if you are free from desire? That's what makes you a human. And if God takes, if an entity per se God, you know, takes that away from you, so what's left of it? Then what's the meaning of all the fruits and all the, you know, everything which heaven consists, if you do not have that consciousness, if you do not have that ability to desire, then what's the use of it? That's basically my problem.
Yeah, I mean, I'm come from a Christian background. I don't know how much the Quran says about this, but there is really no great description of heaven in the Bible. There's like vague like hints at things, but it's not really. You have to kind of guess. You have to kind of try to read between the lines. There isn't really a. I mean, you can read the Book of Revelation and you won't. You'll feel like you were on an LSD trip. Like it doesn't really get you any closer to answering the question.
It feels like you
so,
skipped a chapter. You didn't read something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, not to offend you or something, right? But yeah, the Bible does not give a proper definition of what heaven looks like. The Quran does. I do not want to get preachy about it, but yeah, the Quran does, and it has an elaborate description of how heaven would look like, because, and it must be right, because at the end of the day, uh, at the end, most of the people are, you know, longing for it. Most of the people are living their lives so that their afterlife would be good and they'll go to heaven. And Quran does a really good job in showing them that this is your reward for if you will be a good person, then this is your reward. And inch by inch, it says that you will get this, you will get that, and so yeah, it gives a pretty
Could you-
clear idea. I don't know
Could you
about,
share,
you know,
please?
Bible.
I'm very curious. Could you share what the Quran says about what heaven looks like? Like, if you could briefly summarize it, because I have no idea what. I've never read the Quran.
Yeah. So yeah. So the thing is, I to, you know, clear the thing. I have read the, you know, Quran, but not the exactly the meaning of it. But I know. So basically, what happens is it will contain of, you know, every most of the type of fruits which we usually experience. Right, experience an apple, right, and now the intensity of that apple, the taste of that apple. Now make it 100x. You'll have that there,
Okay.
and you'll have, you know, tree of dates that you'll just see and you will get mesmerized by it, and you'll have, you know, streams of honey. So basically, see, the thing is, the Quran says that uh, heaven is your realm, right? Once you get there, you can that's that's the thing. Once you get there, you can demand anything, right? And it'll be yours. But it also gives specific details of how it'll look like. So that, so it'll have, you know, streams of a river there. That will be very beautiful. And then there's angels. Angels would be there. Okay, and Quran does a pretty good job in explaining the role of your wife, right? So your wife who you marry in this world, she'll also be there. But the thing is, she'll be more beautiful than she will since she was in this world. It's like 100 into X. Like, imagine that, right? Everyone would be tempted. So
That sounds like
yeah.
that
So
sounds
and
like
All
a
there
right,
will
no
be
longer
heathenism.
being a priest.
That sounds like a
No more
heathenism
celibacy for me. I gotta
paradise.
see this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's an
I don't,
interesting
I don't know.
description. It just sounds like I was thinking when I was saying before, like, is heaven like just where everything's gone, or is like peak experience, like peak human experience? And I feel like that aligns more with just like peak human experience, you know, than just
And
ailments
the
taken
most
away.
important thing, right? The most important thing I forgot is that the Quran mentions that you know, you will be, if no, the heaven has levels, right? I don't know if you all are aware of that. Heaven have levels. So
Yeah,
the
it gives some of that in the Bible too. Paul randomly
yeah,
says that he ascended to the third heaven and then doesn't explain anything else. He just says
yeah.
that
So
randomly.
there are 7 levels of heaven, and the topmost level is the, you know, the elitist level. Only the purer ones, the ones who did absolute good, will go there. That's called Jannatul Firdaus, right? So yeah, and the one thing that Quran says that you'll be uh, God Himself will speak to you, and you'll be able to hear His voice. Now that is, and that according to Quran is the most rewarding thing that you can get, and you'll like sleep forever, and once you will hear it, you'll like sleep for 100 or 200 years. That will be so sweet and all. And there's large descriptions. That's just the whole arena of things.
I will say too, like a difference between like the Quran and the Bible is, as at least my version of Christianity, we will accept that like people wrote these books, and like even though it was divinely inspired, there could still be like room for the people who wrote it getting it wrong or interpretation. If I'm correct about the Quran, like you have to take it as if everything there is like as it is. Like there, God literally basically wrote through the person. Like with the Bible, it's more like we can accept that maybe some of the authors got some things wrong. Like I think if the Quran, it doesn't accept that, right? Or
Yeah, so obviously, see, the thing is, we used to believe in the Bible, right? But then Bible got
already corrupted and
by the
stuff.
Pope and that corrupted and stuff. So now we stop believing in the Bible. But there are some things which match, right? Because we used to believe in it. But the Quran is the most. They say that obviously the Quran is the most closest word to God. I mean, it's pure,
Yeah, it's like
as they
the
say.
definitive word, right?
It's
It's
the
like this
definitive
is
word. Yeah,
yeah,
it's uncorrupted in any way possible. It's uncorrupted. So yeah, that's the difference.
yeah. I just wanted to note that too because like when you read the Quran, you have I feel like you take it every single word a lot more literally. Like the Bible, there's a lot more room for, and maybe this is why there's so many Christian denominations. There's like like 1,000. But there's a lot more room to say, well, the authors, while they were divinely inspired, they also weren't scientists, and they weren't. They had what they had. They knew what they knew at the time. With the Quran, if I remember correctly, it's like this is the definitive word of God. Like this is how it is.
Yeah, and there's instances and there's stories of Quran, the words of Quran being uh, descended into the earth. So it's all divine and thing. Like the words of Quran are all divine. It came directly from God. So that is the reason, and it was not corrupted. That is the reason it claims the Muslim people claim that this is the most uncorrupted, pure word of God because it came directly from Him, like directly, like someone went to Him and He imprinted the words on a person's chest, not a person's, the angel's chest. He then descended on the planet, on Earth, on the world, and then he opened his chest and the people wrote it down. And so yeah, that's how the words of the Quran came into existence. So it's so divine and all. It's interesting at the end of the day. You have to, if you think it that.
Yeah. I almost want to bring this back down to earth a bit more though. I have a lot of fun talking about this stuff. A lot of my concern though is like, where we live here and now especially too because even if I do believe there's a heaven, I still have to live this good life, I have to live a good life here and now. So I think a lot of philosophy in some sense is trying to figure out not just like the universe but also how to live a good life. I feel like that should at least be in the discussion of it.
Yeah, I agree. That's one of the
Yeah, obviously, I
big
agree.
tenets. It's like it's amazing and it's super fun to think about what might come after, um, about all of those possible afters. But it's philosophy concerns itself a lot, or at least Augustine in this book concerns himself a lot with like the here and now. how we can do with existing in this world, which is cool beans.
Yeah, so yeah, I also wanted to ask about Augustine, right? So I read book one or two. I saw your story and I thought, yeah, I'll read the one or two, so I read it. And book three I started. Why is he so bothered with children? Why is he so I don't know. Why is he so bothered with children?
We talked
Doesn't
a
he
lot
know
about
that
that.
children?
Yeah, we talked a lot about that in the past book clubs, but it was concerned with like the original sin, and he thought that that
Mhm.
that babies in one way or another, they were sinful because they were always robbing the brother of the milk, or stealing or hitting the mother, and these things he regrets, and he doesn't like that he did them. Um, he sees them as sinful acts. So he's trying to navigate that. He's trying to navigate his whole life in terms of the wrongs he's done, especially the wrongs to his mom and stuff like that.
Well, and this is why Catholics also baptize babies. Like this is it's basically Augustine's fault.
Yeah, yeah,
Like as a Protestant, I didn't get baptized as a baby. We don't believe in that. We believe baptism is a choice. But
It's
in the Catholic
sometimes it's
tradition, you have to be baptized as a baby.
yeah, like sometimes it feels like he has a vendetta or something with children. Like, it's weird. I read the two books and he's just saying that I don't know. It's weird. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
yeah. No, he during his time, the custom, or the what was traditional, what was normal, is that you don't baptize the babies. You grow up, and then you kind of have to like choose for yourself in one way or another to become baptized. But it's later on in life, once you're an adult and once you've accumulated all of these sins, so you can finally wash yourself. It's like taking a shower
How
after a long
Protestants
day.
do it.
Yeah. Um, but after that, after like accepting this original sin that we're all born with, according to that doctrine, yeah, that's when people started baptizing babies.
Yeah, I mean, this is a point where I would diverge with Augustine a bit too. I can understand the points he's making because babies are selfish, right? I mean, the whole point is like pride is one of the greatest sins. And if you're a baby, you want food now, you want this now, and you're willing to inconvenience, but it's not like a conscious choice,
Yeah, we talked about that a
right?
lot. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
that's exactly my point. Sorry to
yeah, it's not
interrupt,
a
but
conscious choice. So, like, we don't
yeah,
see it that way as a Protestant. I'm speaking as for not all Protestants, actually. There's some Protestants that do, but for my beliefs, I don't really consider it until it's a conscious decision that they were fully informed
and
of.
and also I think I'm not aware of his background, but Augustine was a man of science, right? So he must be aware that
Mhm.
children are unconscious in some way. So
Well, yeah, he talks about that a lot.
yeah,
He goes over like I was unconscious as a baby and I don't remember it, and I just have to rely on my parents or people around me to tell me that I was a real thing
Yeah, like
back
all
then.
of his stories are just like they told me this. I wasn't there. I was like Augustine himself. He wasn't fully there yet. He's just hearing the stories that his mom told him about being a little shit, and like being annoying, and being evil or mean. Um, and he just has to rely on faith to some extent that they're telling the truth, and then navigate his way through that. He doesn't think that um that agency or this consciousness matters very much when it comes to sin, which is
Well, he was more worried about human nature than he was about like consciousness, at least in this part, from what I can tell.
yeah.
You know,
so I thought that sometimes I wish that I could talk to him and I could tell him that, bro, it's okay. Shit happened. Just let it go, man. Shit happens. Just let it go. You are a child. It's okay. Happened.
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
I
well,
don't
I
know. I
think
just he's trying. Oh, go ahead.
go for no, go for it, go for it.
Well, I just think he's trying to figure out the human condition. A lot of this is I mean, the whole book is just trying to figure out like what is the human condition. Um, I mean, I do think like every human being has the capacity for evil. I feel like that's kind of like built into us. Like we all have the capacity to like murder or steal or all of that. Whether it's conscious or unconscious. But I don't The way he says it, I will agree, is a bit weird. It's kind of like blaming the babies. It's like, how you can't really blame a child. You know, that's usually the parents' fault, honestly. Like, especially if a child grows up and they're still doing that stuff, it's like, well, you need to teach your kid how to do this. But I think he's just more pointing out, like, it is a natural inclination to. I would also point it's also a natural inclination to be good and give, but whatever. I don't know. That's how I understand him.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna like hang out for longer, but I'm gonna end the recording now or soon. Do you guys want to like leave any final remarks or any final passages for the very, very few people that watch these?
Well, I mean, I hope it was insightful
All right. Yeah. I hope you guys.
into the Christian psyche.
Yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed the conversation between an agnostic and a Christian and a Muslim. All right.
Yeah, that was interesting. Some insights.
On the recording there, and I'll just hang out still though.